It is now 10 o'clock in the morning, so we should begin. I would like to begin by welcoming members, officers, members of the public or press, and those watching via live stream to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee at New Shire Hall. The Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. But can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assembled in the car park. The closest fire exit is through the middle doors on my left. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies from Councillor Liam Beckett and Councillor Seif is substituting.
Thank you. Does any member or officer wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you. Just on agenda item 6, I am a member of RECAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other declarations? Lovely. Okay, in which case we will move on to agenda item number 2, minutes of the meeting 12 June and the action log. We are asked to approve the minutes for the meetings held on 12 June 2025 as a correct record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only. I see no objections, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Attached to the minutes is an action log. Do officers have any updates? No updates to report. We are therefore asked to note the action log. Agenda item number 3, petitions and public questions. We have no petitions or public questions. Agenda item number 4, now it gets a bit longer. Local nature recovery strategy. Can I ask Quinton Carroll, Head of Natural and Historic Environment, to present this report, which is on page 17 of your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Quinton Carroll, Head of Natural and Historic Environment, and with me is Phil Clark, Biodiversity and Green Spaces Manager, and we're here to present this paper on the final version of the Local Nature Recovery Strategy, or LNRS, from the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, which is the responsible authority for LNRS as defined under the 2021 Environment Act. I would like to highlight at this stage that this report is based on the Council's role as a supporting authority. The focus, therefore, is on whether the LNRS meets its statutory requirements and also meets the requirements of the County Council, so as to be able to support the final publication of the strategy. The full background to the LNRS was set out in the committee in June, but as a reminder, the LNRS is statutory requirement under the Environment Act and is a key lever in the government's approach to tackling the nature crisis in England. We, together with other public and third sector bodies, have adopted the ambition to double nature in response, and the LNRS is to drive that ambition. Numerous other stakeholders have participated, including Natural Cambridgeshire Wildlife Trust, Cambridge Past, Present, Future, Environment Agency, RSPB, etc., etc. The LNRS is now in its final stages. The Combined Authority undertook a wide-ranging public consultation that ended on the 11th of September. An assessment of the response is presented as Appendix 2 to the report, but overall, the feedback indicates a strong support for the LNRS, with 74% of respondents either strongly agreeing or agreeing that the strategy clearly outlines how to enhance nature recovery across the region. Respondents frequently commended the strategy's ambition, its clarity of its objectives, and its alignment with local priorities. Concerns were raised around the funding, delivery mechanisms, accountability and enforcement, suggesting a disconnect between the broad public endorsement of the LNRS's objectives and the level of confidence in its practical implementation. The Combined Authority, as responsible authority, is fully aware of these challenges and will be leading on the next steps. Specific issues raised by the County Council included detailed amendments to species and habitats, and more generally a concern about the potential impact of development land being identified as sites suitable for nature improvements. This latter concern was raised by other landowners across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Noting this, the current DEFRA guidance states, and I quote, LNRSs won't require you to change how you use your land or restrict development. They provide information to help you decide how to manage your land and make informed choices. Likewise, if you want to do nature conservation work in any area that isn't prioritised in the LNRS, you still can. LNRSs won't prevent this, and funding for nature recovery activities won't only be available for areas mapped in an LNRS. We are anticipating further guidance on this, and I would ask members to note that the next version of the National Planning Policy Framework, and also, I believe, National Policy for Decision Making due out later this year, may provide more clarity on this. The LNRS itself was updated to reflect all this feedback as per para 2.13 in your report. And before you today is the final version set out as Appendices 3A and 3B, the two constituent components of an LNRS. It has been endorsed by the Combined Authorities Growth Committee on 5th of November and goes before the Combined Authority Board on the 26th of this month. The Combined Authority, as the responsible authority, is then required to formally ask supporting authorities for agreement to publish the strategy, giving a 28-day period to raise concerns via a publication advisory notice. At present, officers do not foresee any need to issue such a notice, noting that the Combined Authority final board meeting on it has yet to take place. In reaching the recommendation, officers have considered the statutory requirements, the LNRS, as set out in the report, its scope and content, and applications to the Council's Climate Change and Environment Strategy, Biodiversity Strategy, and Tree and Woodland Strategy, previously adopted by this committee. Officers believe it is a thorough and viable document that will help us meet the challenge of the nature crisis in the county and inform a bridge between growth and nature. Therefore, the recommendation is as set out to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, to review the Combined Authority's final version of the LNRS and consider whether it's appropriate to confirm our support for the Council's support for it. In seeking this delegation, I can confirm that officers will ensure that all members of the Environment and Green Investment Committee will receive a copy of the final LNRS sent through by the Combined Authority for our agreement to publish after their board meeting, in which we will highlight any changes made by that board. This will allow all members to ensure that it remains in line with the documents before you today, and if not, to comment specifically on changes made to help inform the Chair and Vice Chair's consultations with the Executive Director. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions through the Chair that might arise.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions for Quintin, who is supported by Phil Clark as the Biodiversity and Green Spaces Manager? Councillor Seif.
I was only going first because I didn't see any other hands. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I'm a sub on this committee and I've only just been able to skim through the papers. So if the answer to my question is covered, I apologise in advance. Can I ask if this strategy requires the creation or development of any areas of SSSIs or SPAs, special protection areas, which would perhaps require time to meet the criteria and be so designated? That's the essence of my inquiry.
Yeah, thank you. In short, no, it doesn't require any SPAs or SSSIs to be designated. So yeah, simple as that, no.
Councillor Rees.
Hi, thanks very much, Quintin, for the briefing. Thanks, Chair, for allowing me to ask the question. I'd just like to acknowledge, there's lots of really exciting and positive things in the report. There are loads and loads of partners have obviously been involved in the decision-making process. So that all sounds great. I just want to revisit this question of the practical implementation, which you mentioned, Quintin. So, and I think I'll quote it out again, just from point 2.12, the issues suggest a disconnect between the broad public endorsement of the LNRS's objectives and the level of confidence in its practical implementation. So I'm wondering if we could, have some idea about what these next steps are that you alluded to about, precisely what measures will be put in place to measure the practical implementation of this? Is there a way that we can have some KPIs and this committee can get regular updates about this implementation from the CPCA?
Thank you for the question. This is a CPCA document, and at present the statutory requirement is to have an LNRS. In terms of the comments that came back from the consultation were effectively acknowledging what you said. This is an extremely ambitious document that, if a strategy that if fully implemented, could have very wide-ranging benefits for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. What isn't set out at this stage is exactly how that's going to be delivered on the ground. Now, conversations with DEFRA that have been taking place between all LNRS parties have indicated that further support will be coming from DEFRA to the responsible authorities for the delivery stages of this programme. It's long term. This, I mean, this effectively will drive everything for years to come. There's a refresh cycle, which is every 3 to 5 years, isn't it? Yeah, where we have to go back and say how we are improving. In terms of measuring the impacts, all public sector bodies now have an enhanced duty to biodiversity under the Environment Act. So we have to report our achievements, in effect, and publish them. And actually, in fact, that report is coming to the next meeting of this committee. In terms of our own KPIs, we will use the LNRS to support the delivery of our biodiversity strategy and tree and woodland strategies, both of which have KPIs which will be reported back through the normal cycle. In terms of what the combined authority will be producing in terms of data to show the implementation, I don't think we know that yet, because that's the next stage for the combined authority to pick up and interpret. But we will take your concerns to the steering group and say and ask them to set out, the CPCA to set out to us how they propose to report.
Councillor Black.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask whether, I mean, there's certain really specific things that can do a lot for diversity, and I wonder how our diversity might be affected by the recent banning of neonicotinoid pesticides, which were very much a threat to bees and other invertebrate lifestyle. And as you're probably aware, there's been permissions given to farmers to spread these rather poisonous chemicals for the last 15 years, and that we have now had a change from DEFRA, and our local MP in Cambridge was involved in this, and these are now banned. And I must wonder how these might show up on our diversity stats, and if there's any way we would pick that up, and indeed if it might encourage us to plan to target things specific like this, which are the sort of things that really do impact on our diversity. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's good that they have been banned, and the one way that we could monitor that is because they are particularly have an impact on bee populations. So one of the things we could do is have a baseline for the various species of bee, and we could measure how those, although that's quite intensive, that's to be able to do that. And there are probably other organisations that we could partner with to see what they're doing in terms of collecting data that we could use. In terms of how much of that we use across the rural estate, I don't know. I mean, that's always difficult information to get hold of because it just relies on the tenant farmer and what they're doing, and I'm not sure we collect that data. But if it is banned, then hopefully it's not being used. Yeah, I mean, we can find that out. We can go to John Macmillan and find that information, whether it is recorded from the tenants. So I think hopefully that answers your question. It's an answer which needs further sort of discussion.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Rees, did you want to come back? I recognise I cut you off.
Oh, thank. I just, if I may, if you can go to the CPCA with this concern, does that need to be put into the action log?
we can note it in the minutes if we're.
Okay, so it doesn't need to go to the action log though. I'm not sure how the action log, what things qualify to go into the action log or not.
It can go in the action log. Yep.
Oh, okay,
you.
thank you. And so if that is an action to be taken, it would just be great to know that we'll get some measure on how this specific LNRS strategy is being, how it's going, separate from just the major one. Otherwise, I think it might just get lost in the other report that you mentioned. And so, yeah, if the action could be that we could ask CPCA to make a decision about what KPIs they will be measuring and to feed that back to us, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask a question. So there's a lot of partners who've contributed to this. Do you think overall it's helpful, irrespective of the challenges of implementation, is it helpful overall to have all the partners coming together and agreeing on a single document? Is that something that in itself, even if the combined authority didn't implement it to the level that we would like to see, is that helpful as well? Because everyone knows what they're working towards, and is it helpful at district level in terms of planning decisions? Does that give extra strength to decisions arguing for nature?
Having that partnership has been extremely helpful. But I'm going to be honest, it's been quite hard work at times because obviously everyone sat around the table in these meetings has their own passionate viewpoints on this. However, the fact we have had people like the Wildlife Trust, the NFU, the RSPB, and the National Trust have all got behind this. And I would like to just pay tribute particularly to the Wildlife Trust, who have been extremely helpful in pulling all this into a single document. It does mean there's something there that people are happy with, and yes, it will help people. It will help people drive their own ideas forwards by effectively trying to inform that this decision making. That's what the document's for. It is going through all the districts for approval as well between now and Christmas, but then again, it will be up to each district how it draws the LNRS ambitions into their own strategies. Whether it's through local plan or through an adoption of a green infrastructure strategy or tree strategy. But what we would say is because it's there, because it's agreed, and because everyone has contributed, everyone's voice is in this document, then it's something that will hopefully meet everyone's requirements.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Bastanci.
All right. So thanks for the very comprehensive document, which was clearly really well supported during the consultation. Ultimately, we're sort of all serving our community. So I was going to ask about the parish level. Can the strategy sort of support efforts to join up pieces of land at the parish level for both environmental and community benefit? And when some of these pieces of land may be owned by public authorities?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, because I did want to mention it. So that is something we acknowledge, that the production of the strategy was quite top-down. And so we recognise that there was very little engagement from the grassroots up. So we were very pleased to get the Just Transition Grant Fund, which has allowed us to start the Nature Recovery from the Ground Up project. We have 2 project officers now starting to deliver that, and we are going out to clusters of parishes in each district to work with them to create parish biodiversity plans, which will build on this existing strategy, but identify at a local level using local knowledge mini projects which can help deliver some of this. So it may be restoring old ponds, digging new ponds, planting hedgerows, but to empower and skill up and give confidence to those parish councils, community groups within the parishes to carry out some work, but also to provide an evidence base so it's easier for them to apply for other grants that are available to deliver this work. So at the moment, we're working with 5 clusters in each district. And as the project title says, it's from the ground up. So it's getting local people to tell us what they need, what they want to do. And then the other way that can become into sort of planning decisions is to include it in neighbourhood plans. So there are some parishes at the moment who are working with us and also in the process of their writing their neighbourhood plans. So it could come as a sort of a model way of doing this work and giving it some sort of planning status.
Thank you. That sounds really exciting.
Councillor Seif.
Thank you, Chair. One of the wonders of coming to something completely fresh is that you can ask a question that's probably been asked 1,000 times. I'm going to do it. This is a CPSA, ultimately a CPSA policy, and it's for them to find the ways to deliver it. But presumably there are costs involved in actually delivering the sub-projects and right across the board. Do we have any idea of what are we getting complete buy-in from those authorities that are going to have to deliver this? Obviously, there, as you suggested before, following on what you said, there will be grants available, but presumably there will also be financial contributions from district authorities at the moment and any other bodies who want to support this strategy. So I just wondered whether and how far advanced the thinking on financing or any aspect of this will be.
Thank you for the question. The report acknowledges that delivering this is going to cost, and will have, at the moment, from our point of view, will have to be funded from operations, but operations associated with other things. So biodiversity net gain, for example, is an important lever, and it's still the case, I believe. Yeah, I don't know, it's changed, that BNG proposals that draw on LNRS priorities get a higher score, for example. And BNG, assuming it continues in its form, is a viable source of funding for nature recovery, particularly given the size of some of the planning schemes within Cambridgeshire. They're going to have to deliver their BNG, and that's what LNRS is for. It also, central government do periodically issue grants. So I'm thinking about the local authority treescape fund. There's the agricultural SFI, the single farm incentive. So, and again, all of those the actions of those can draw upon the LNRS to pull the funding in. However, I would just go back to the point that DEFRA made in their guidance about this, in that funding won't only be available for LNRS priority areas. It will be available across the board, but the LNRS will help prioritise where we get that funding from and how we spend it.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much. This is my first time on this committee, and I'm sorry to have to put a negative voice into the first comment. The LNRS, in principle, sounds very harmless and a lovely scheme, but the reality is that it's a vastly bureaucratic and, as has been mentioned, expensive exercise that will lock our residents, our landowners, our planners into yet another layer of environmental red tape. Now, the consultation was dominated principally by environmental lobby groups, not local families, businesses, or farmers. I know some farmers were consulted, but not as a broad inquiry. And the strategy has huge power to unelected bodies while restricting development at a time when we really urgently need homes and growth. Now, I firmly believe in protecting nature. That goes without question, but not through these top-down frameworks that are dreamed up in Whitehall and delivered by Quangos. So I'm sorry, I'm not supportive of this. Thank you, Chair.
So was there a question there? Okay, that's fine. Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. So I was going to make a general comment, but the last speaker sort of prompted something. Just in terms of context and what we're doing, we're very proud, and I think the County Farms Work Group is very proud about the biodiversity net gain project that we've been doing at Lower Valley Farm in Fulbourn, and I would urge him to go and take a look. And why is that interesting? Because there's a direct link between development, which you mentioned, what we're doing on that farm, and a link to developers, and it has a very substantial financial return for County Farms. So I would urge him to go and take a look rather than make generalized statements about Quangos and Whitehall input, because this is not Quangos and Whitehall input. This is what we're doing locally in Cambridgeshire. And it's producing nature benefits and it's producing money. So I would make a plea that he contacts the Farms Working Group and goes to take a look at that. And that is a real project. And we had a visit from the Duke of Gloucester, who then told us he was going to inform the Duchy of Cornwall, because the Duchy of Cornwall now want to start a similar project because it has huge nature benefits and huge financial benefits. Thanks.
Before I move to Councillor Black, is it a question or is it an element for debate?
Yes, it's a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wonder, Quentin, thank you very much for this very comprehensive report, which I perhaps should have started before. I think this is some great work. And I just wondered if you might want to give us some examples of local people who've contributed to this report, because when I look at the list of organisations that's contributing, I recognise a lot of them. Some of them I've been involved in myself. I mean, I noticed there are organisations there that are absolute experts on things like birds and I think on bees and so on as well. You know, so I do. I mean, okay, I am a member of the public as well as a councillor. I'm feeling that there has been an impact from organisations I'm involved in, voluntary organisations, very expert organisations, into the review. And yeah, I'm pretty confident that this is not just Quangos, this is local people having a say. And I wonder if there's any examples of that sort of feedback you might want to highlight. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, I mean, I say it was top down, a lot of the big organisations, but a lot of local people were involved and they were part of the consultation. So there are lots of those groups, like a lot of the naturalist groups, they were heavily involved in helping us develop some of the actions, the objectives. So it is based on local knowledge, local data, people out there on the ground volunteering to do this work. But also that recognised that we needed to develop this other project called Nature Recovery, where people are proactively deciding at the local level how what they want to do fits in with this bigger overall strategy. So, I mean, as we've started to go around the clusters of parishes, it's amazing what we're discovering that local people are doing off their own backs, their own initiatives. There's a lot of stuff happening out there, some of which is fed into, I will mention Histing and Impington, for no other reason apart from the fact that they are like way ahead of us in what they're doing locally. And there are other parishes as well. I mean, I'll mention Somersham Parish, not just because I live there, but because they are doing fantastic things. So, and part of this nature recovery from the ground up is finding out what people are doing and how we can support them to do more. So yes, there is a lot of action happening on the ground.
If I may just add to that, the Combined Authority were adamant that the consultation had to be as wide-ranging as possible, because yes, a lot of the work that went into developing the priorities and things does come from the expert agencies. But so they were keen that local people had the opportunity to comment. So it went to parish councils, events were run in libraries, I believe even the director of Natural Cambridge stood up in a church service and said, please comment on this. So it's so there was a lot of efforts made to engage with local people to get their views, and that's measured in the number of responses, I think particularly on the mapping, wasn't it? A lot of people were adding information to the maps, suggesting things to be added or removed.
Councillor Thornhill.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting me speak. Yeah, just a quick question. I mean, just to kind of just take that a little bit further. Oh, sorry. Sorry, just to take that a little bit further, the point that you were raising before. Just want to ask about, you know, because I'm obviously involved in the various parishes as well. Could you perhaps give some specific examples of what parishes are doing? I'm just thinking about the parish that I'm involved in. They are not quite sure what to do, you know, how much the grant's going to, you know, cover for what they want to do, how long the grant's going to last for. So it'd be really, I think it'd be really useful. I mean, I think people want to do all this, they're enthusiastic, but sometimes they just don't know quite, well, what can I do? You know, what maybe at a small level, what can I do? And if you could give us some, maybe not necessary today, but, you know, at some point to the parishes, just here's an example, this is what you could do. I think it would be really helpful, and it would encourage them, I think. And I think you try to enable parishes to do the right thing, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I can supply a list of the parishes we're engaging with and give you a flavour of some of the projects they're already doing. One of the things that we're aware of is that some parishes, some community groups are like way ahead of where we are with the project, and there are others that are like, as you say, well, we want to do something, what can we do, how can we do it? So we want to use some of the really sort of go-getting parishes as case studies to demonstrate. And we're looking at the possibility of having talks, and we've had people offer to come and do talks to other parishes who aren't quite sure of what they can do. And that's where the two project officers will come in. They'll help to facilitate that and provide any training that might need to be done, like how to, for example, how to write a successful funding application so that it's, you know, you increase your chance of getting that grant. But one of the other things of this is to develop an evidence base of information that you'll need to go into a funding application, because there are lots of grants out there for local level projects, and some of them don't succeed because they don't have the information. So, for example, a question that gets asked in the applications is, how have you consulted with your local community? How do you know that they want and support this project? And the biodiversity, how do you know that the biodiversity is there and you need to do this work to enhance it? So this evidence, gathering all this information now and doing the mapping and getting local people to suggest things, means that you can answer those questions better and easier and increase your chances of getting the grant to do the work. So it's coming at it from lots of different angles, and that's what we're there to do and help support with.
Thank you, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Manning?
Thank you, Chair. I was I think like Councillor McDonald's, I was moved to speak about the mention of quangos, and I had a question for the officers about the organisation responses, but I was just looking down the list of organisations who responded, and I was trying to find a quango. I mean, I see things like the Church of England. I don't know if we regard that as a quango nowadays, do we? Or, you know, there's quite a long list there. I'm struggling to find. They look like a very wide range. And I note in the report, the question for officers, there's a comment there about the individual responses versus the organisational responses, and you note that the organisational responses tend to be more critical, and I can see the logic behind it. I just wondered, could you comment a little bit about were the different organisational responses, I think the phrase you used was disagreement, actually, sorry. Were they disagreeable in different ways or similar ways, or was there not a discernible pattern in terms of how the organisations responded?
So I'll be honest, that's a tricky one to answer, because the organisations will tend to respond from their own priorities. But the thing is, those priorities don't have to be competitive. So part of the the reasoning behind the collaborative way of this was produced was to try and work through where those differences might be.
Are there any other questions? Would anybody like to contribute to the debate? Councillor Tierney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Some interesting comments raised. I've quite enjoyed listening. First of all, just to clarify a few things, I think some of those things are quangos. I mean, technically, to be a quango, it has to be non-governmental, but to be partially funded by the government. We can't see the funding of all those organisations, but I'm sure quite a few of them do qualify. And I do welcome Councillor Fisher's concern about top-down controls and red tape and overly bureaucratic approaches. So I think that's quite useful for us to watch. But having looked at this strategy, I don't feel it errs on that side of things too much at the moment. In fact, I enjoyed being told that that private landowners weren't going to be forced to do anything. They were being given guidance. I think that's exactly the right approach to help people to understand what they can do, and then they can make informed decisions. So I think broadly we're heading in the right direction. And I would clarify that the Combined Authority is definitely not a quango. It's actually a governmental organisation. So it's been a really interesting debate. I do think we ought to watch how this progresses, because I think we all value nature and want to help recovery and to help the biodiversity thrive. But I think we also need to watch that we don't become so controlling that we actually counter the effects we're trying to achieve or damage growth in such a way that it financially causes us big problems. So I do think both sides of the argument have been useful, and I think we're heading in the right direction. Thank you.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you. Just a question, if I may, about the biodiversity net gain, which has been mentioned. And I just honour as well, there's been some wonderful training courses for this committee. So thank you all those and for yourselves, for involvement in all of that has been wonderful. I just want to clarify, or can I please ask for clarification on what this strategy really means for biodiversity net gain? Because as I read in the report, page 177, that we've got supporting BNG policy, encouraging 20% as a minimum where possible. I wonder about the location of this biodiversity net gain. Often it will be either on site or off site. Sometimes it's put onto the excellent Fulbourn area, but then lots of residents in my area in Newnham have made the point to me that if there's a lot of concrete going down in a particular area and there's wildlife that live there, that is where the nature is being disrupted. That is where people are going to live and wildlife is going to live. And so on-site biodiversity net gain is preferable to the off-siting. That's been made to me by a lot of members of the public. So I just wonder about, is there any recommendations here about that question for biodiversity net gain?
Thank you. Yes, biodiversity net gain is an interesting one, and you're absolutely right about the balance between on-site and off-site BNG. A lot of people, you do get some projects where it's incredibly hard to do on-site BNG. I'm thinking particularly of linear schemes like East West Rail. Their corridors are so tightly drawn that they will often de facto look for off-site opportunities. On-site BNG, particularly in major developments, is important, and it helps improve the environment, deliver green spaces, public spaces, etc. How that's done is down to the local planning authorities and their own strategies around this and their own ambitions. And often it's a balance between a development being viable and also being attractive and delivering BNG. And those are the processes that we go through when BNG submissions are given to us, both in our own role as a Minerals and Waste Planning Authority, and the district planning authorities have to go through. It's the statutory minimum is 10%. The aspiration is 20%. I know some developers try and get higher than that if they can. A lot of that is dependent on the actual sites they have. And the opportunities afforded. And the other thing to bear in mind around that is it's generally acknowledged, I think, that sometimes people in nature spaces don't particularly help biodiversity, because obviously if people are using space, then they can be damaging that space if it's something that's particularly fragile or significant. So often the balance has to be struck between public accessibility and actually delivering the maximum benefit from biodiversity. And that's when, again, the on-site, off-site balance can be a tricky one. But again, BNG has been maturing as a concept over the past few years, and some, I think, pretty good Greater Cambridge now are very skilled, are learning more and more, and are far more proactive in how that's balanced.
Councillor MacDonald, one last comment, and then I think we'll wrap this item up.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just reminded by the speaker. So, you know, we can all recall the phrase the concrete jungle, right? So the concrete jungle was certainly a phenomenon in the 60s, the 70s. Moving forward now from that, there's a lot of imaginative stuff going on. Just to be parochial for a second, what Wellcome are trying to do in Hingston with biodiversity net gain is almost model what Bourneville did in the 1900s, what happened in Bourneville, which is you had an environment which was a work environment, but it was also very much a nature-based environment. And so these examples are there from the past, and there are examples in Greater Cambridge. And, you know, everybody benefits. It really is a win-win. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, before I move to the recommendation, I would like to say thank you for the work on this. It is a very impressive report, and it is really exciting to read about the nature in Cambridgeshire and see it outlined in such a comprehensive way. And I know that lots of partners have been involved, and the county council officers have been heavily involved in pulling this together. And I think it is a very impressive report. The recommendations are that the Environment and Green Investment Committee is recommended to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Environment and Green Investment Committee to review the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authorities' final version of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Local Nature Recovery Strategy and consider whether it is appropriate to confirm the Council's support to the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority as the responsible authority. Are we in favour, or would people like to vote on this? Does anyone object to this? In which case, I will take this as carried unanimously. Oh, Councillor Rees.
If I may, I think that I was expecting some debate about this. No?
I did offer an opportunity to debate.
Okay, well, just as you read out the thing to vote on, may I just ask if we have any specific amendments or suggestions to be made to when we give this authority to members, because I had some suggestions.
So we did have the opportunity for debate, and amendments need to be submitted in advance of the meeting unless there is some emergency identified, and I don't see an emergency identified in this situation. That said, there is an opportunity to liaise with the Chair and the Vice Chair and the Director. So if there are any particular issues, can I suggest you take this outside of the meeting, perhaps with a spoke from your party?
Okay, sure. It was just from the discussion, just a couple of minor points, so I'll take it up later.
Thank you. In which case, are we in support? We will take this as carried unanimously. Thank you. In which case, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, Climate Change and Environment Strategy and Annual Carbon Footprint. Can I ask Emily Bolton, Climate Change Strategy Manager, and Rachel Unwin, Senior Insight Analysis, to present this report, which is on page 281 of your agenda pack.
Thank you. The Council reports annually on its carbon footprint and progress towards delivery of its climate change and environment targets. This report presents these findings, highlights positive. Thank you. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. The Council reports annually on its carbon footprint and progress towards delivery of its climate change and environment targets. This report presents these findings, highlights positive climate action during the last year, and the impact of the Council's climate change programme is having on achieving its net zero and nature targets and delivery of our corporate ambition 1. This is predominantly a backwards look, though later sections look at what this looks like going forwards. The report also provides an update on development of a new climate change and environment strategy as the current version ends this year, and an update on the FENS 2100 Plus programme. I'll be giving an overview of the first part of the paper and then handing over to Emily to cover the rest. The Climate Change Environment Programme has been in place for a number of years to drive forward delivery of the Council's climate and nature ambitions. Key programme highlights since October 2024 are set out in section 4 of the paper, covering a range of themes, including recruitment and capacity building, climate and energy, nature and biodiversity, water and adaptation, highways and transport, corporate processes, and awards and recognitions. Section 5 of the paper includes a summary of the annual carbon footprint report, which is included in full as Appendix 1. This is the 7th annual carbon footprint report, covering Cambridgeshire County Council emissions up to the financial year 2024-25, and Cambridgeshire County area emissions for the calendar year 2023. Shown in Figure 1, direct emissions, or Scopes 1 and 2, have reduced by 51% since the baseline in 2018-19. Key emission reductions since then include decarbonising heating and property rationalisation, and some fleet vehicles switching to a lower carbon HVO fuel. The emissions in 2024-25 are lower than the linear pathway to achieving the Scope 1 and 2 emissions targets for the first time since 2020-21, when there were significant reductions due to COVID-19 restrictions. Based on current known policies and planned projects, future Scope 1 and 2 emissions are expected to continue to decrease slightly until 2027-28, then remain relatively constant until 2030-31. Shown in Figure 2, in 2024-25, the Council's Scope 3 emissions increased by 1% compared to last year and have decreased by 32% from the Council's baseline in 2018-19. Key emission reductions since the baseline have resulted from reduced construction activity since 2020, partially due to COVID-19 restrictions, and decreases in utility consumption for maintained schools. Figure 3 shows a linear pathway for achieving the Scope 3 target. The latest year of emissions in 2024-25 are below this line. However, future emissions based on current policies and known planned projects are expected to be greater than this pathway and not have reduced enough to meet the Scope 3 target. Estimates for the rural estate emissions are shown in Figure 4. However, no new primary data from tenants has been collected to estimate the 24-25 emissions, so these changes only reflect changes in the number and type of farms owned. The Cambridgeshire area emissions are shown in Figure 5 of the report, and this data is published by the UK government. This shows a reduction of 1.5% for 2023 compared to 2022, and this is similar to national trends. Emissions are now for the first time lower than they were in 2020, when again there was a dip in reductions due to COVID-19 restrictions. I'll now hand over to Emily to talk through the rest of the report.
Thanks, Rachel. So the annual risk report brings together the findings from the carbon footprint report that you just heard about and our wider progress in delivering our action plan and looks at all of our climate change and environment strategy targets. It is a risk-based approach, and so it assesses the remaining risk that our targets might not be delivered. I'll not go into detail at the methodology because it takes quite a long time and is quite nuanced, but a link was provided in the paper to that methodology. So each target is assessed individually, and this is detailed in the full report. That was an appendices provided, along with an aggregate position across all of our targets. And an update on delivery of each individual action within our action plan is also provided as an appendix. Overall, the risk of missing our targets has remained unchanged since 2024, and this is really reflective of the fact that our easier, quicker win activities have either been largely complete or are well underway, with our more complex activities now remaining. To support delivery of some of our more complex and trickier actions, as previously mentioned, we've undertaken significant recruitment and capacity building over the last year, which should now start showing those benefits in years to come. Section 7 sets out the types of activities looking forward that the Council will now need to consider to ensure we remain on track to meet our targets. And the intention is to build these into our approach to our new climate change and environment strategy. So already touched upon, the current climate change and environment strategy comes to an end this year. And so a new updated version is now needed. And so we just wanted to provide this committee an update on the current thinking around what that looks like ahead of the final version coming through later down the line. So the 2025 Quality of Life Survey reaffirmed that our communities are both concerned about the changing climate and indeed expect the Council to play a key leadership role in this space. Combined with that, we are now in a new context to where we were a few years ago in 2022 when the current strategy was drafted. We need to develop an approach that reflects new priorities, emerging challenges, and indeed supports preparedness for LGR as we move beyond 2028. So actions that will be developed are intended to either be delivered within existing resources or are framed such that they can support or be supported by external funding opportunities. So it's proposed that the new climate change and environment strategy will retain the same level of ambition as within the existing version, but that the narrative will also be updated to really strengthen our improved understanding of the wider benefits beyond just the environment that action can bring Cambridgeshire businesses and communities. So that's covering everything from helping to improve health outcomes, manage inequalities, support local resilience, through to in turn ensuring long-term sustainable growth for our area. Section 8.3 sets out the key changes to support a more refined, actionable strategy that focuses on actions and activities specifically that the Council is best placed to deliver and which respond to the types of things our communities and wider partners have been indicating to us they would like us to see. And they've been communicating this to us through various surveys and other strategies such as the LNRS that you've already heard about, all the way through to events, partnership meetings, and indeed direct approaches that we quite often get from particularly our parish councils who are keen to take action. The emerging strategy and action plan are in development currently with a view to coming to this committee in January. And so ahead of that, we have recently arranged a workshop for the 8th of December, to which all members of this committee are invited to provide opportunity for more detailed comments and input to that process. So thank you, and I'll hand back to Chair for questions.
Thank you. And the workshop is very welcome. I'm sure many of us will join that and have a lot of comments to make. So members, do you have any questions for Emily and Rachel, who are supported by Ethna George as the Head of Economy and Climate? Councillor Manning.
Thanks very much, Chair. First of all, I want to say absolute congratulations. I'm looking at the list of awards you've won on page 5. You should be justifiably proud of yourselves in getting all those. The points I wanted to bring up, Chair, were Scope 3. I think we need to be a bit more ambitious about how we tackle Scope 3 emissions. I take the point about access to data, but I think we can maybe have an approach of the quality of responses from our providers. I'm going to use the obvious one that I know a lot about, which is cloud computing. So, you know, the quality of the data that you get back from AWS compared to Azure, for example, is a complete gap. You know, Azure is a lot more details, I'm sure you know, about what you get back. And I think that sort of approach of saying to our providers, tell us how you are calculating your Scope 3, tell us what evidence you can provide for it, and using the quality of the response and the amount of data you get back from them as a benchmark to say, even though we have to trust their Scope 3 number, right? If they can give us more detail about how they actually calculate it, which they should be able to, then that is a sort of benchmark I want us to try and use to try and be a bit of a driving force to say that just stopping at saying Scope 3, I'm not saying you're just doing that, but just saying Scope 3 is the really hard one, which it is. We can go a little bit beyond that as a council. And relating to that is generative AI. I'm sure Emily's not going to be surprised I bring this up, but we can look at, I think there's two things here. There's one, the energy use behind generative AI, and there's also an education piece, I think, for council officers, for members about just using Gen AI all the time has not just all the difficult moral implications and the data implications, but it has the energy consumption it uses. And I think that's, whilst we can't stop people going on these sites, we can monitor some of it. We can monitor our use of Copilot, for example, internally, which we should be using internal Copilot. So I'd hope that, I mean, we can probably talk about it more outside the committee, but I don't know if you want to comment on those at all, but that's what I really like to see as sort of driving forwards and being a bit of an exemplar nationally.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. So certainly quality of data is a key challenge, particularly on Scope 3. We range from having absolutely nothing coming through to really great detail coming through from our supply chain. A lot of it depends on the nature of the service they're providing. For example, the carbon emissions associated with a single bed in a care home is far more difficult to estimate than others, such as materials from highways. We are building this into the new strategy and are proposing some key actions around strengthening our procurement approach and how we ask those questions to try and get the best information from our supply chains. As I say, recognizing that some will have the capacity and capabilities to do more than others. And similarly, on the AI front, again, we're looking at some specific activities to really get to grips with that. As you say, it's a potentially emerging area for us that could cause problems if we don't sort of understand it properly.
Thank you very much. I just also wanted to compliment on the fact that we're working across highways with this, which I know is a good point for Frank being the director. I think it's good seeing that note about the joint editorial. So well done on that.
Bolton.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification, if I may. What I've understood from your report is that Scope 1 and 2 emissions are less than 1%, and Scope 3 is the vast majority. I can see that you've got the Scope 3 figure at 180,000 or thereabouts tons CO2, and then later on you've got the farm estate, something like 200,000. I can't. Should we add these together, or are they the same number?
So yes, in the figure 2 in the carbon footprint report, this shows our best estimate of the entirety of the council's emissions. So as you rightly say, Scope 1 and 2 is less than 1%. It's 0.2%. The 180,000 figure is then what is labelled as Scope 3 in that pie chart in figure 2. The rural estate is separate to that, so it's another 200,000 approximately on top of that other 180,000.
Councillor Seif.
Thank you. Following on from Councillor Manning's question, I'm looking at paragraph 3.2. Sorry, I can't remember which appendix that is. Anyway, page 340. Looking at the risk regarding Scope 3, and it's obviously come down from the massive risk initially 25, but you're still assessing the risk of delivering that target at 16, which is pretty high given the actions that you're taking, some of which you indicate and some presumably listed somewhere else. I don't know. What I wanted to ask is, what are the biggest risks to not achieving that target? I mean, you're obviously embedding in the procurement process a lot of questions, and you're saying people are cooperating. So why do you still think that we've still got a very high risk of achieving that target?
So I think there's a combination of things there. As we've already mentioned, and I think Rachel touched upon, getting hold of decent Scope 3 data is difficult. And so there's that element of uncertainty that's being reflected. But I think similarly, when we've got such a diverse supply chain that we're dealing with, we've got, VSEs, SMEs who might have limited capacity to make changes, all the way through to some really quite significant national firms. I think it's recognizing that those different capabilities across our supply chain and the diversity of it make it difficult to kind of set a single set of terms that say you must and have that apply to everyone. And so I think that's why there's still quite a long way to go. We've also got a lot of existing contracts And obviously our key point through procurement is when we're renewing our contracts to implement that change. So there's that time element there of almost waiting for things to chug through the system a little bit.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to add to this as well. I think some of the additional challenges around Scope 3 is relates to the fact that we still have responsibilities in relation to things like school place planning, and we need to build more schools, and that gets counted against Scope 3. So we have to balance some of the statutory duties against the ambition. And as it's been quite rightly highlighted by a question as well, is that one of the other challenges is just the sheer extent of the rural estate and the contribution that makes in terms of carbon emissions. So in the revised strategy that will come to the committee that Emily's referred to, we are putting more significant targets and measures against the rural estate, because that's probably the most significant area that we could have some influence over. And that's previously, in the previous administration, this committee, noting the rural estate issue, took the decision to actually separate the rural estate out of the monitoring, so that we could actually then break down in terms of the things that we could have more influence on over the current period. And then we still have a separate strategy around the rural estate as well. So that will come forward in the future strategy. So that's just to help members understand where we're at and some of the risks and balances that we've got to make as a council. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question, which is, so when you look at the map of the United Kingdom and the emissions from the land, we are very, very red. We are as red as you can get, red being bad, in terms of emissions from the land. And so that's why that's been separated out, and that's sensible. Are there solutions to that? Like, do we know what the solution to that, or is that future work that needs to come forward to identify what solutions for that could look like?
So that is definitely an area of a lot of research, I would say, and certainly the County Council, some of our rural estate farms have been part of DEFRA-funded pilots to explore quite what we do about land use emissions. It's largely our peatlands, which of course are why we're such a great place for agriculture, but also are causing those carbon emissions. So there's a lot of work going on in that space to try and frame what the problem is and how to understand it. Colleagues in our rural estates team also sit on Fenland Soil, which is a local group funded in part by our combined authority, tackling this exact problem. And it brings together the agricultural sector, the university sector, and ourselves as major landholders in trying to, again, work out quite what the solutions are. It's a thorny one, but it is something that there's lots of effort going into. And there are some suggestions around, rather than, or some suggestions around needing to look at developing mosaics across the landscape. So providing opportunity for farmers to use some of the environmental land management schemes and other opportunities for them to also look after the peat at the same time. But it's definitely a work in progress position.
And presumably, just to come back, that work also relates to the fertility of the land and the ongoing viability of it to operate in such a high level for agriculture.
Yeah, that's correct.
To Thornhill.
Thank you. You're showing in your graphs linear progression to hitting your targets. Are you? I mean, just to go to a point that was raised before about you've got some big risks. Is a linear progression a realistic sort of progression, do you think, or do you think it'll tail off after a while? And for that, I'm thinking about the risk, but also I'm thinking about the financial side of this as well. Will you get to a point? Have you got enough money to deliver all the things you need to deliver to hit that target?
So in terms of that linear position, we have discussed this in the past, and I think in previous papers that came to this committee put forward that the linear reduction is probably the best one to use for the time being for the purposes of monitoring. And so that's why we're using that one, but fully take your point that it'll potentially there'll be more of a tail off curve that we don't quite know what that looks like just yet. In terms of the funding position, you're right, it is a challenge. However, I think there's equal parts cost, but also opportunity here. So some of our schemes that are well underway and have already been delivered, such as under our schools energy efficiency programme, For 71 schools since 2014, that's delivered almost £6 million worth of savings on their energy bills. So you've got investment, but that saving that can be reaped. Similarly, as the council, following receiving Just Transition funding in previous years, which has really spearheaded a lot of the activities that you're hearing today. We've used that circa £4 million to bring in an additional £8 million worth of external investment into the council to deliver our projects. So you're right, there are potentially big sums of money involved. However, it isn't just looking at council delivery and council funds, it's looking at how we can best use our skills and expertise and seed funding from the council to bring in vastly more to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Rees.
Hi, thank you, Emily, Rachel, for this very detailed report. One quick question, if I may. So I echo the drive to be ambitious about Scope 3, and I really hear all the huge difficulties around that. So really admire your work about that and looking forward to future and with your ambitious aims there. One question just about how these things get reported, if I may. Page 286, I'm reading the emissions from this, this is Scope 2, which is very, very small apparently, but just to get my head around this, the emissions from this are zero as the council purchases a zero carbon electricity tariff through the supply contract. So I'm just wondering, is it correct to think that the emissions are really zero here? Or is this actually that the emissions are being displaced and they're being counted by someone else and they're therefore not by us? So is that what's going on, or is it really, really zero? And the second question is just about this that was mentioned by the chair, this huge red, the peatlands, and the fenland soil and so on are working on this. And my question is, do you think that we have the adequate mapping data to understand this problem? Or would more advanced geographic information systems understanding of our ecological and peatland area help us with that really difficult work? Thanks.
Thank you for your question. To pick up on your first query, so Scope 2 can be reported in two different ways, location-based and market-based. Under market-based emissions accounting, Scope 2 reflects the specific supplier tariff. So as the council uses a zero carbon tariff for its electricity, those emissions are reported as zero. It's not displacing those emissions elsewhere, but collectively across the country, every organisation that is using electricity, using their specific supplier mix. Some using this method will have a more carbon intense mix, and some will have a less carbon intense mix. This was explained further in the recent training session, where there was more detail on this with some sort of graphs showing the different images. So perhaps looking at that could be good. And I'll hand over to Emily to cover your second query.
Yeah, in terms of our understanding of where the peat is and if it's skirt peat, wasted peat, good condition peat, that has been a problem. So until a few years ago, I think a lot of the data was some 40 years old. And so DEFRA and the Environment Agency acknowledged that this was a big problem. And so recently, a new England peat map has been developed and published by government. The idea behind that is to try and get a better grips of where it is and what the quality is, and therefore where you need to make interventions, where you don't, but also what is actually the true extent of the emissions in the first place. Because the calculations that government make are predicated on knowing what peat there is and where it is. Having said that, there are still uncertainty around even that new peat map. And individual farmers saying, this land is not as peaty as the peat map is suggesting. So it is, further information is always helpful. And I know Fenland Soil, it's particularly on their radar to try and get more localized data to understand and influence what we do locally.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers, for your report. And can I also thank you for your really high quality training sessions for members as well. Much appreciated. So I've got a general question about the new strategy. Given that most experts would agree that the world is going to pass the 1.5 degree average global warming by 2100. Does the new strategy cover any ways in that we're all going to have to adapt to the new climate? I mean, obviously, there's a lot more force needed now to reach our emission targets, but also we have to think about how we're going to live in this new world. So I just wonder if there's any of that in the strategy.
Yes, so the strategy covers both the carbon reduction piece, which I think we've talked about a lot today, but also that climate risk management, the adaptation piece. As you say, we're already experiencing more extreme weather and more localized impacts. And so it's about making sure we're resilient, both our communities, but also us as a council and business, to ensure that we can continue to effectively deliver our services as well. So that's covered alongside the nature piece at the same time.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Look forward to the new strategy report. Thanks.
Are there any more questions? In which case, I will move to the debate. Would anybody like to contribute to the debate? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. It'll come as no surprise to longer standing members of this committee that I don't support net zero targets, and I never have. I don't talk about it very often in this committee because there's no point in me getting up on my political high horse and posturing every time the issue of climate change or net zero is raised, because it just bores everyone, and broadly the committee doesn't agree with me. So what I try to do instead is to input in a sceptical but constructive way. However, once in a while, something like this comes up where the title is so clear that I feel I have to speak. Otherwise, it will be seen as a tacit endorsement of it all, which I don't. Now, first of all, the report is fine. The officers have done what the authority and the government expects of them, and I've got no problem with that. And in fact, looking at it, most of the ambitions and targets I would support. There's a couple I don't, but broadly I support most of what we're trying to do because, like everyone else, I want a clean, green environment. I want healthy people and a healthy nature. So, of course, I support it. But I do think that net zero is a ruinously dangerous path to tread. And I've been saying this for quite some time. And when I first started saying it, I was the only member of this committee who thought it. And broadly wasn't supported by a majority of the public. But over the years that this has progressed, that has changed until I would say, looking at recent surveys and studies, that the public is now broadly where I am. Certainly a slight majority, I would say, and growing every day. And certainly internationally, where a lot of countries are completely dropping out of net zero targets and all of the ideals behind them. So I did feel like I ought to speak up and say that I don't support the idea of net zero targets at all. I think they are dangerous and harmful to people. That doesn't mean that I don't support a lot of the ambitions that we try to do, and it doesn't mean that I don't support cutting carbon and other things that are dangerous for our environment, because I do. I support them where it can be shown to be financially advantageous and health-wise advantageous to the public. But that's where it becomes difficult, isn't it? Because you can write studies and read reports to say almost anything you want them to say, and people do on every side of every argument. So it's a difficult challenge. I do feel that some of the language in here, I've raised this issue before, but it annoys me when we do policy gymnastics to try and pretend that we're going to cut income equality with these policies. We just aren't. All of these policies are making life more expensive for everyone, and that's just fact. And unless you can show me that the things you're doing are genuinely cheaper without any of the jiggery-pokery that goes on, genuinely cheaper than the alternative method, you're not telling the truth about that. As for health inequalities, I don't like the term inequality because I think if everybody's getting healthier, it doesn't matter if some are more healthy than others. People have lifestyle choices they make. So I don't like the term health inequality. I've raised that before as well. But I do think we should strive to try and help everybody be healthier if they choose to. And I think you're jumping through a few hoops to try and suggest that these policies are doing that either. I do think that quite a lot of people who watch or follow meetings like this, I know there aren't thousands of them, but some, I do feel that they sometimes wonder, why doesn't anyone think what I think? And so I feel that I have to speak up on issues like this sometimes so that at least some people who are watching say, well, there is someone who sort of agrees with what I think. So broadly, no problem with the report. Thank you for the report. I don't support everything in it. I support a lot of it, but I do take issue with the net zero targets and I'm never going to support them. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks. So Steve prompted me because I wasn't going to say anything, but now I will. Just on energy security and energy costs. So I got my EDF energy bill day before yesterday. I've just pulled it up now. So I think most people know this, but just let's remind ourselves. So in my electricity bill, 51% are wholesale costs. And in the gas bill, of course, it's 60% of wholesale costs. Problem we have at the moment is we have kind of a perfect storm of the highest wholesale energy prices we've seen forever. And secondly, at the same time, where Steve is right, is we're trying to invest in green measures. So we've got this perfect storm of both things happening at the same time. But as we move forward, so we're thinking about the schools, we rebuilt the school in Duxford because I think it was 7.5 million, Frank may be able to remember, after the fire. But guess what? The energy efficiency of that school now is infinitely better than it was. So I do understand the comments and the concerns about, you know, are the green measures and are the efforts on carbon reduction impacting our residents right now? Maybe they are. But in terms of a long-term strategy, if we continue with 50-60% reliance on wholesale energy costs, we will be way behind other countries and we will suffer in the long term. So that's why I support this work and support what we're doing at county level. Thanks.
Councillor Seif.
I'd just like to ask Councillor Tierney a very quick question. You suggested that these...
Through the chair, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Chair. I apologise. Through the chair, I would like to respond to the comments of Councillor Tierney. He has suggested that the policies themselves are harmful, or is he suggesting that those policies themselves are harmful, or is it just simply that they will bring some additional costs for this generation as opposed to the next generation?
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the question. It's great to have some actual debate, and we don't see that often in these meetings, so I do welcome it. Yes, I do think it's harmful. That doesn't mean everything about it is harmful, because nothing is as simple as that. But I do think that when you say, or do I just mean it's financially costly for people on the breadline, that's harmful. That can mean the difference between a good dinner and not a good dinner, making sure your child has the new uniform they need for school or not. So I don't accept the idea that just because it costs you a bit of money, that's not harmful. That is harmful. It's probably the most single harmful thing, because it leads to illness and ill health and poor education and poor standards of living. Those are the things that we need to look at. And it's easy for those of us who are doing okay monetarily and perhaps aren't affected by it, but millions of people are affected by it, and those are the ones I worry about. And I speak to them all the time. They tell me how hard life is and how the latest bills come in and they just don't have the money to pay for it. So that does matter. And as for the next generation, again, I don't want to get into a huge climate argument here, but I am a climate skeptic and I don't agree with probably your position. I don't know your position perfectly, but I'm not as concerned or terrified of the future as you seem to be. And I do think that the next generation will be affected by how we tax and spend money right now in this generation, because that's their education and their upbringing and their early standards of living that will lead to the next generation. So I do think it all matters. And I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth first of all saying that Councillor Teeney's position on this has been long-standing. He was had this position when I was last on the council. And in a way, I admire him for sticking up for his principles. I don't agree with them, Chair, but I think it's good that he is. The word is brave enough, not quite the right word, but is willing to stand up for them. I think it's probably just worth stressing that this report is about the carbon reduction strategy. It's not about the broader issues that Councillor Teeney was talking about. I know from first-hand experience that I've got residents in poorly insulated homes in divisions across Cambridge. Their homes got insulated. Guess what? Their bills went down. There's pretty simple stuff you can do. So I think perhaps we could consider at some point in the future trying to pull out the actual financial benefits. But for me, this is actually about an existential crisis. And I know Councillor Teeney disagrees with me, but frankly, that's the point in doing this stuff. And there are cost savings that come with it and financial benefits for people, and that's why I support it.
So McDonald.
Chair, you're very kind, but Steve said we wanted a debate, and I think it is a debate, and I think it's a really important debate. I think he raises a lot of valid points about cost of living or potential impact on cost of living. What he never mentions, and some of our reform colleagues never mentions, and is if you look currently, and again being parochial in Greater Cambridge, where we're doing retrofit projects, for example, there is huge employment opportunities for young people. Those jobs just didn't exist before. Recently, I was in the northeast of England, and they were making or repairing blades for the turbines for the offshore wind farms. I think somebody told me that there were over 100 apprenticeships jobs for young people. Those jobs didn't exist before this came in. So all I would ask in the debate, and I think it's fair to have the debate, and I think it's really fair to challenge on cost of living, because there are potential cost of living implications. But when we have that debate, we've got to look at all these other upsides that are being generated by carbon reduction measures. Thanks.
Councillor Thornhill.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say, it just made me think there are a lot of jobs being lost because of what we're doing as well. Exxon have just now pulled out in Scotland 450 jobs, but that's not really one point I wanted to raise. Just going back to the report, it talks about the green tariff, and I struggle with these green tariffs because at the end of the day, it's a bit of a kind of left hand, right hand sort of manipulation so that we can kind of claim carbon reduction, but in reality, the grid is the grid. It's like the air that we breathe. We all breathe the air. We all use electricity. The grid is a mix of fossil, nuclear, and obviously green power stations as well. I just wondered whether, and again, this might trigger a little bit of a debate here, but maybe we should just look for the cheapest tariff rather than the green tariff. Then again, we can then spend more money supporting vulnerable people rather than just trying to tick a box in some respect, because I don't believe in the green tariff is the best way to represent what we're trying to do. I think it masks what we're trying to do. That's my comment.
I would like to come into the debate at this point, and I would like to say that I recognise the point about green tariffs and whatever, but we need to bet. But there is this point that at the moment, if we would purely in terms of energy security, if we are relying on high carbon energy sources, the places where they are produced are in other countries where we have no control. Our energy demands, our requirements are growing all the time, particularly with electricity. So actually having us supporting the market and supporting green energy, which is produced in this country, is a really long-term strategy. So alongside everything else, actually there is a really strong argument that council should be leading the way in terms of supporting the market. Would anyone else like to debate, or shall I bring this item to a close? Councillor Rees and then Councillor Seif, and then we'll vote.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying this debate. I want to say that I think there's a huge business opportunity here for economic growth and enterprise with green energy. So I don't accept this assumption that net zero is catastrophic for our economy and raising our bills. We can see it as a great opportunity. And firstly, myself and Green Party colleagues, there's a climate emergency. That is the same emergency as the cost of living emergency. It's not as though trying to help net zero is causing the cost of living crisis. It's the same people who don't have properly insulated homes. They are also the people who are struggling with cost of living. Or grandmothers who just now are sitting in their living room in 40-degree heat that we're seeing, and literally they can't survive in their own living room. These are the vulnerable people, and it's the climate crisis, the cost of living crisis. They are entangled. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's just so many things to say. First of all, do people believe that we're already in a climate crisis? I think we are, and certainly certain parts of the world are, and people are having to cope with that. Now, people in the Far East and places where there are extraordinary temperatures and floods, and they're having to spend vast sums of money to repair that. We're having to do it here in Cambridgeshire as well. So we're already starting to see the effects of that crisis, and that will impoverish the people that are directly affected by that. But if you look to the future and think that, like it or not, we're going to move into the world of AI, just as an example of one of the technologies that's going to change the way we all work and hopefully will increase the global wealth. We are going to need vast amount of energy, and we ain't going to get it from oil or fossil fuels. We have to get it from other sources, and that means the type of renewable energy proposals that do cost money now. Yes, they do, but they will make for a better future for our children and our children's children.
Thank you. So I will be moving to the vote, but before that, I want to thank officers for the extraordinary amount of work that has been done in this area. It is groundbreaking, and also from everyone in this room, there is support of the actual material items that we have done to make the lives of people better in Cambridgeshire. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for an excellent report. The report recommendations are that the Environment and Green Investment Committee is recommended to A, approve the annual carbon footprint report as a record of the Council's known greenhouse gas emissions for the financial year 2024 to 25, as outlined at section 14.1, and B, approve the annual climate change and environment strategy progress report for the period October 2024 to November 2025, as outlined at section 14.2. Can I see those in favour? Can I see those against? And can I see any abstentions, please? Thank you.
Chair, the result of the vote is 11 votes in favour, none against and 4 abstentions. The recommendations are carried.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much for that. We will now move to agenda item number 6, recycling in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, recap, waste strategy and management design. Can I ask Brian Ree Rothwell, Waste Partnership Manager, to present this report, which is on page 355 of your agenda pack?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. As members will have seen, the committee report contains 2 essential waste documents that require updating. The first, the Recap Resources and Waste Strategy, which will replace the county's statutory joint municipal waste management strategy. And the second will replace the existing Recap Waste Management Design Guide. Both of these documents, being considered for consultation as part of this report, have been produced in collaboration with Recap partners, which includes Peterborough City Council, the City and District Councils of Cambridgeshire. The Resources and Waste Strategy acknowledges the baseline information of the current waste technologies and contracts that each council is currently signed up to, whilst also highlighting the changing waste legislation landscape, before looking to the future to provide an opportunity to appraise the infrastructure available to the Recap partnership and consider where efficiencies and improvements may be made. The RECAP Waste Management Design Guide is linked to the Council's Minerals and Waste Local Plan and provides guidance on how and what waste management infrastructure should be provided for new developments. It effectively therefore provides the basis for waste infrastructure requirements and Section 106 payments to be sought through the planning system. The recommendation within the report seeks to allow both documents to proceed to public consultation starting next month between the 1st of December and the 26th of January. The consultation will be promoted across the RECAP partnership, and the information will be provided on the RECAP website, as well as the consultation documents made available in New Shire Hall. As set out in Appendix 1 of the report for consultation, will include engagement with key interested parties, such as developers and planning agents, which align with the Council's statement of community involvement. Once public consultation has taken place for both of these documents, it is proposed to bring them back to the committee next year so that they can be considered individually and recommended for full adoption by adoption for full council. I'm happy to take questions.
Councillor Kerr.
Sorry, I just realised I should have declared an interest because I sit on the RECAP board for HDC.
Thank you. I also sit on the board. It's in my register of interests, and Councillor Tierney has also declared. Yes, I have a question. So the design guide, this is a really useful guide. I represent Orchard Park, which is a new build area, and it has lots of blocks of flats, and it is not uncommon for me to have complaints about access to bins, and that's basically what this is about. Is that correct?
That's correct. For collection authorities, it's been very difficult sometimes with new residential developments to actually get access to bins and bin stores. So it's trying to improve those requirements.
So, for example, if my residents were to engage with a consultation, they might not have solutions. They might not be able to say, you need this entrance to be 2.71 metres wide, or whatever. But if they were to outline the issues they experience with bin collection in their communal bin areas, then might that be helpful in terms of the consultation? Because then you can make sure that the measures proposed will address those challenges.
I'd hope we'd address some of those already. But yes, of course, if there's not a clear understanding of the measures addressing the issues that they're having, then yes, that's the kind of response we'd be looking for.
So, and in which case, how do we plan to circulate this consultation so that people who live in blocks of flats and might be experiencing issues today are engaging with it? So we make sure we're addressing all the issues we possibly can, because I know this is thorough and a lot of work's gone into it, but if someone has got something really useful to say, it would be great if they can say it.
So the intention is that we will be using the RECAP partners' usual medium to communicate with their residents. So asking them to circulate it out all of the regular kind of social media methods, as well as providing the document if necessary in their offices. And we will be putting the information up on the RECAP website and promoting that as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Bryony. May I just ask about this bin access question? Because, on my way here today, I drove, or Councillor Green drove us through Eddington, which is an example of a new development where they've adopted a new waste strategy, right? So they don't have bins there. It's built in, right? Just for my benefit, can you talk us through what is the approach? Is that what's been the success rate on that? Because I've heard lots of things. Some people say, oh, well, to produce the new kind of truck that you need to collect that rubbish, it's extraordinarily expensive. So do we have a report on that, and how is that feeding into your strategy? Thanks.
So this new guide does give better guidance for those planning new developments about underground storage. So for those that are not aware, these are bins that are very large, that are underneath the pavement, so that people living in flats or houses can bring out their waste on a daily basis and put it into the relevant bin. And they're picked up by hydraulic vehicles, which obviously have to take these large containers from under the ground. So they're a different mechanism compared to the ones that we pick up, wheelie bins, from households. So it's giving better steer to developers about where and when it's appropriate to install those, and to encourage them to engage early as possible with their relevant planning authority at their district council, so that they can actually get guidance on specifics. Because in the past, there's been opportunities missed, unfortunately, where we would have liked to have seen underground storage, but the guidance hasn't been clear enough in that particular scenario. So they've put in regular wheelie bins, and it causes all sorts of problems with disruption to pavements and congestion in areas where residents are trying to move. So that we're trying to close that loophole in the sort of guidance to the developers to encourage more to use them where it's applicable.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? In which case, would anybody like to contribute to a debate about this item? In which case, thank you so much for this. Again, this is another report, or another pair of reports, which has an extraordinary amount of work that has gone into it. And it's been really great to read all the work. The Environment and Green Investment Committee is recommended to A, approve the statutory consultation of the draft recap interim resources and waste strategy 2025 to 2031 and the updated draft recap waste management design guide, and B, approve the publication of an updated Cambridgeshire Minerals and Waste Development Scheme to reflect the decoupling of the emerging draft recap waste management design guide in the timetable to allow consultation and refresh of the document to take place sooner. Do I see anybody who objects to these recommendations? In which case, I will take them as unanimously carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, East Park Solar Farm NSIP proposal. Please can I ask David Carford, Principal Consent. Councillor Seif.
Sorry, I should declare that I'm the member for St Neots, the Eatons, which is marginally affected by this. Didn't realise that before, but.
Thank you, Councillor Seif. So can I ask David Carford, Principal Consents Project Manager, to present this report, which is on page 495 of your agenda pack.
Thank you. Yes, here to present the paper on East Park Energy. This report provides an update on Brockwell Energy's proposals for energy solar park to be located on the Cambridgeshire-Bedfordshire border. The proposals for the solar farm includes a cable route, a connection to Easton-Stoken substation, and a battery energy storage system. The scheme is currently at pre-application stage. Pre-examination stage of the National Significant Infrastructure Project. The application was accepted by the Planning Inspectorate on the 30th of October of this year, and all the documents associated with the application are available in the Planning Inspectorate's website. The next step is for the registration period to begin, and that's to be announced by the applicant, in which all interested parties can register to participate in the examination and to submit their relevant representations. Relevant representations are for an interested party to outline the key issues they consider pertinent to the application. We are awaiting the dates to be confirmed and notices to be provided in the press by the Planning Inspectorate. And we will be notifying all members when that notification is out and we know the dates for certain. As the scheme is proposed as a nationally significant infrastructure project, the Secretary of State for Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero is the decision-making body. The Planning Inspectorate will act on behalf of the Secretary of State through the process of examination, the proposals, and aid the Secretary of State in their decision-making. The Council will have to submit timely responses to the Planning Inspectorate and to central government throughout the process to ensure that our responses can be given their full weight. This includes submitting relevant representations. Deadlines can be at short notice during the examination, as short as 2 weeks, and in the region of 9 to 10 deadlines will be set in a 6-month period during the examination. The paper today presents the key themes which we will inform the County Council's relevant representations. The key themes are listed in paragraph 3.2 of the report, which can be found on page 498 of the agenda packs. These are based on officers' responses to the statutory consultation held in October 2024, and we are seeking endorsement by this committee. Our technical experts have commenced reviewing the application, which is available, and will be drafting the relevant representations in the coming month. To that end, the paper's second recommendation seeks delegated authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Environment and Green Investment Committee to approve the final response to the application, relevant representations, following this committee's discussion, and for further requests for information in relation to the application to meet the deadlines as set by the Planning Inspectorate. This is in line with delegated approval by this committee for other nationally significant infrastructure projects.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just tell me, I'm sure it's in the report, but I haven't looked closely enough to answer it. So could you tell me what the 769 hectares are presently being used for? Thank you.
Mostly it's agricultural use.
Are there any other questions? Councillor MacDonald.
So similar question to Councillor Tierney. Obviously, agricultural covers a multitude of things. I think a concern overall from a lot of stakeholders is where farms are appearing on grade 1 and grade 2 land. Do we know that, or it doesn't matter if you don't have that today? Maybe we could follow that up with the Chair and Vice Chair. Thanks.
Yes, during the consultations that the applicant has held, they've been sharing information, and within this application there is also survey work for land classification, as in the quality of the land, and so that is being reported on. More generally, the solar scheme being brought forward is obviously promoting the benefits of the energy production and green energy. And that's offsetting impacts to agricultural kind of production.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Thornhill.
Yes, I'm just wondering whether you'd considered the other solar panel development, the Kingsway solar panel development, and the lessons that have been learned from that. It turns out that their revenue isn't as strong as they thought it was going to be, because when the sun shines but the demand is low, they have to turn the solar panel off. So I'm just wondering whether you'd factored that into the business case for this development.
This is very much with the promoter, and they don't share fully all the details. However, the assumption is obviously they've got a business case there. They're already incurring plenty of expenses in bringing forward such developments as this, and their proposals, their business case will be their business case.
Just to remind members, this is a commercial scheme that an application is being made to government through the NSIP process. What we are looking at here today is the response of this county council as a statutory consultee to that application. And we can see that the measures that the county council believes should be considered are outlined in this paper. So if we think anything is missing or would like added to, this is our opportunity to comment on that. Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me come back. It was a similar question or clarification. Again, don't have to answer today, but if you can consult with the Chair and Vice Chair. Is it bordering any county council farms, or does it involve any county council land?
Yeah, with all these schemes, we do involve our rural estates, and they're often impacted. I will need to double check and clarify with you separately whether any of our rural estates are impacted by this East Park Energy scheme.
Councillor Seif.
Thank you, Chair. The cable line from Alconbury to Eton-Soken is going to be a heck of a long line. So I just wonder whether and how we have, well, I guess the route is mapped on what we have been shown, but is that cutting through roads, or is it cutting through other agricultural land, and what level of disruption is anticipated from that?
Yes, there is going to be a cable route, and that will be through predominantly farm fields. So the impact is first and foremost the installation of the cable. It will be put at a depth where the agricultural use can continue after its installation, and the installation of the cable at any given point should be in a relatively short time. And of course, we'd encourage the promoter to time that with the farmers, and they'll have various land agreements with the farmers when to work on the land, and how to leave it in a state which can be continue to be used after the cable is put in place.
Cut through any roads? Are we going to get road?
Yeah, there
closures
is one minor road to cut through, which is immediately north of the substation itself. So they will need to at that time, but because we've only just got sight of the application, we need to check what they're now proposing. But there are options that include basically burrowing underneath the road as opposed to digging the road up. Those are options, so we'd need to look at the application in detail to see what their proposals are at exactly that point, to see how much disruption they're making to the highway at that point. But that will be a highway within Bedfordshire.
Councillor Poulton.
Thank you. I'm excited to see such a large solar project in the area when we're desperately short of energy. But I've got one question. In terms of energy storage, storage is very important from the point of view of balancing the grid when we have lots of fluctuations in demand. And as there are going to be more and more houses built around here, and I guess data centers, so this is going to become more of an issue, I would imagine. I couldn't see how much energy storage was proposed.
That'll be up to 100 megawatts.
100 megawatts is power, it isn't storage. It's power rating. Storage would be megawatt hours.
I'll need to double check, but I think it would be megawatt hours. But I'll need to check and confirm that back to you.
Can I ask a question? So this is the planning response, but separately and parallel to that, there will obviously be a negotiation happening with the authorities with the proposer for community benefit and whatever contributions. And as there are lots of different councils who are all working on this, can we have reassurance that the councils are working together and negotiating together as effectively as possible, and any indication of who is leading that or how that partnership work is working across councils?
Yes, so Bedford Borough Council and Hunts District Council, all officers are working collectively on this matter. We were at statutory consultation. We were reminded that the public were being consulted on the community fund, and there were some options being put forward. So we very much wanted to hear what the public and the communities wanted first and foremost, and what the results were from the statutory consultation. But we did flag up that it's really important that the governance, the structure, how it's actually distributed to the communities, and what criteria are used, what the purpose of the fund is, are all really critical points that need to be discussed, and we asked to be involved in those.
Thank you. Any further questions? Would anybody like to contribute to the? Oh, was that a question or debate? Debate. Councillor Seif, please kick us off.
I just wanted to make the point that this project seems to me exactly the sort of project that we were talking about, or could have been talking about, during the last debate. Substantial solar energy project which will be to the good of both climate change and indeed benefit the community. So I think that the council is, as illustrated by the paper and the questions that we've asked, asking the right questions. They are addressing the right sort of concerns. So I very much support this project. I mean, in terms of the general principles, obviously, this is not planning committee. So.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. I despair. We spent the first agenda item talking about how we wanted to protect and restore nature, and then we want to cover 769 hectares with solar panels. sometimes I lose the will to live. I cannot believe that on this list of issues that have been raised by County Council, we've got nesting habitats and the need for a mental health impact assessment, but no mention of the loss of arable farmland and food production. I mean, goodness, I just can't believe it. Obviously, that must be on there. The loss of so much. We were told when I asked that most of it is farmland. So all that farmland is gone. All over the country, we're covering the area with useless solar farms, absolutely pointless wastes of time and money, and starving people and taking away all our arable farmland. It is madness. It is national suicide. And we will come to rue the day and regret every one of these steps. This county council should be opposing this with every fight it's got in its body. I worry about this constant use of the National Infrastructure Project. Of course, that's what the government does when it knows that if it were decided locally, it'd get thrown straight out. So they make it a National Infrastructure Project so that it's decided much higher than local authorities, destroy democracy, take out anyone's opinion. I feel a little sorry for local councillors who have supported these sort of measures and are now going to face the kickback from their local people who are going to say, what on earth are you doing? But that's their own fault. I absolutely disagree with the entire project, but if we're going to press on with this report, then we must put in loss of arable farmland as an important concern. Thank you.
Can I just clarify here before the debate continues that if we were to oppose this or support this project, that would be a political decision, whereas this is a technical paper. This is a response to a planning application or a future planning application. And so this is a technical report. If we want to have a political position, then there are mechanisms which we can use to adopt that political position, but this is not this committee and this is not this paper. Councillor Black, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the paper. Yeah, looking at the last comment, I think this is one of the reasons why we need to make sure that projects like this are not obstructive. And we have a new dynamic government, which is doing great things to absolutely make sure that we are moving towards energy self-sufficiency. And I think go back to a previous debate, but we need to look at the science of these things as well. And it's easy for somebody to say, well, I think that if you put some solar panels in, that will be harmful for the biodiversity and so on. But the fact is these things generally don't sit on the ground, they are elevated. And what is there before as intensive farming is usually very much against biodiversity and doesn't have the hedgerows and things that creatures need, and is often soaked with poisonous chemicals. And actually, when you get a large-scale solar farm, often it's possible to do much more small-scale farming around it with a greater diversity of crops. But there are plenty of studies that show that these places are actually better for biodiversity than an intensively farmed field. And usually what the places that are chosen for these things are actually not the best agricultural land. And as laymen, it's quite difficult to look at a field and say, well, that looks like it's very productive, or that doesn't look like it's very productive. They probably look the same to us, but you see the land values and there are differences. And actually, we are far less energy self-sufficient than we are in terms of food. And we have a big continent right next to us, which is desperate to dump its surplus agricultural production on it if we can. We are not going to run out of food. In fact, we have problems with overproduction and problems with the amount that farmers can earn from producing food, which is under pressure from both the people they sell it to and the amount of production that is going on. So, it is easy to sort of come out with some sort of populist argument about this. But we should be looking at rather and celebrating the fact that we are making progress on our going towards some sort of energy self-sufficiency. Thanks, Chair.
Track of anyone else who wanted to speak. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate it. To be fair to Councillor Tierney, it is very important as a statutory consultation the report is balanced. And that's why I asked the question about how much of in the map was grade 1, 2 or 3 land. Because certainly where it's grade 2 or 3, that's much less of an issue than where it's grade 1 land. And I think we owe it to ourselves, and I'm very happy to support the papers, but just ask that the Chair and the Vice Chair with the officers, update that, and make sure it's as balanced as possible. That's in everybody's interest. Thanks.
Would anybody else like to speak? In which case, we'll move to the recommendations. The Environment and Green Investment Committee is recommended to A, endorse the key themes identified at the statutory consultation stage to raise in the County Council's response to the application as part of the relevant representation. B, delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Environment and Green Investment Committee to approve the final response to the application following the committee's discussion of a future request for information relating to this application to meet the deadlines as set by the Planning Inspectorate. Is everyone in favour of this, or would you like a vote? Okay, we will vote. Let us move to a vote. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those objections?
Chair, the result of the vote is 11 votes in favour, 4 against and no abstentions. The recommendation is carried.
Thank you. Thank you for the report presentation. The time is 11:55. As part of our constitution, we're required to have a break after 2 hours. So can I propose we take a break and we come back at 5 minutes past 12? Thank you. Right, so we will resume the meeting. Thank you very much. Can I ask, so we're on to agenda item number 8, the corporate performance report. Can I ask Frank Jordan, Deputy Chief Executive and Executive Director for Place and Sustainability, to present this report, which is on page 539 of your agenda pack.
Right, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So the Council's got performance management framework in place, and that's attached to the paper as an appendix. And the performance management framework effectively outlines how the strategic framework, which is the vision and ambitions, are going to be taken forward by the Council, and has some strategic performance indicators that relate to that. And these have been allocated to each of the policy and service committees. So this report provides an update on those indicators that are relevant to environment green investment, and provides the update on the performance for the first quarter of this year. And in the indicators, there's 4 key themes which relate to the committee. And I'll just go through some of the sort of key issues. So the first one relates, in terms of the measures, relate to carbon. Now, clearly, we've just had a very, very detailed report, item 5, on the carbon footprint, and these indicators basically mirror the detail that was included in that report. There's also indicators relating to waste management, noting that we have some responsibilities around waste disposal, but we don't manage the whole system because some of the waste management operations are undertaken by district councils, but nonetheless we report the whole system measures to the committee. And I think particular things to note is that overall during this year so far, we've seen a reduction in the amount of waste that's being collected. That's linked to a drier summer in particular. So when we have drier summers, we actually have less green waste. So that reduces the amount of waste that's needed to be disposed of. But the other issue we'd particularly highlight is that the recycling performance and the amount of waste that we're disposing of by way of landfill is higher than we would want. That's particularly because of the issues that we've been experiencing for quite some time around the issues with the waste disposal and management facilities that we've got at Waterbeach. There is a very detailed strategy in progress around how to address that issue in the long term, and that will be reported in a confidential session for strategy, resources and performance before the end of this year. And what I mean by year is municipal year. So that just highlights some of the issues around waste. Also, we've had reports linking to the strategic responsibilities of the council and this committee's oversight around strategic planning matters, particularly relating to nationally significant infrastructure projects. And you can see in those indicators that we have good performance in terms of being able to respond appropriately to those planning matters. And then finally, the fourth area which the committee has oversight on relates to digital connectivity, and we've got indicators there relating particularly to the gigabit connectivity, where we're still seeing increases in performance there, but we are highlighting that there is a gap in performance between urban and rural areas. And on that, the revised programme is currently being discussed with the combined authority that funds the digital connectivity programme, and there is a lot more focus coming from the combined authority, and that will then translate into the programme for next year, and therefore we'll have appropriate indicators around improving rural connectivity. So Chair, that's the sort of four main themes. Gives you the oversight of the sort of key performance issues. I'm happy to take any questions, and Emma Fitch, Service Director, may also be able to assist if there's other questions that I'm able to respond to. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Manning.
It's just a very generic one, Frank, and I appreciate you might not have a direct answer to this, but I just note there are a number of the indicators where the commentary is very, very short and the path to green is blank. I'm just wondering if we could, for next time, something looking particularly 005 and 004. I appreciate it might be that there's no easy way to get there, but it just sort of looks a bit, just jumps out at you when you look at some of them are very, very detailed and some of them have.
Yeah, so I suppose as a general response to that, first, some of the indicators that we collect as have outlined are what we call contextual, because we're not directly responsible for some of those measures. So, for example, those relating to waste collection. However, what I would say is that we are in the process of reviewing the strategic framework, and then the performance indicators will be reviewed as part of that, and through other committees as well. I think there's been a request from members, whilst we've got the strategic indicators, just to have a lot more narrative around other measures and other initiatives that we're taking forward that might relate to the measures that we've got in here. So I think as a general response here, we try to find as as much information as possible that's relevant to the committee, but we are going to review the indicators to make sure we have got the right indicators for each committee as well.
Any other questions? Councillor Thornhill.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a kind of a comment to start off. Yeah, it's so important to have KPIs so we can always measure our performance and measure our success. But one of the questions I've got is around, you talk about corporate performance and corporate, I suppose, responsibility as well. One of the things that we do have is we think about the Slavery Act that we have. We have a statement. I just want to think about, when we are approving initiatives like the solar panel farm we were talking about before, we do we have a corporate responsibility to make sure that that we do procure in a good way, that we think about the provenance of the rare earth materials that get used to put into solar power farms. Can we make sure that we do adhere to our modern Slavery Act and do challenge the provenance of any equipment that we buy, particularly from other countries, to make sure that we're supposed to be a caring, community. I'd like us to think, we care about other people in the world as well. So sorry, it's a bit of a rambling question, but I just want to make sure that we do take care. We do think about that modern Slavery Act statement that we have that covers that aspect of procurement.
So I think the oversight of that would fall within the Assets and Procurement Committee. But what I would outline is that we have signed up, we have a modern slavery statement, i.e. that we completely oppose it and want to put measures to manage it as much as possible. And through our procurement, through our key suppliers, that's something that we make sure that those who supply to us have similar statements. But it's not just the statements, that we actually audit and have evidence that that is taken forward. But I think in terms of providing assurance around that, that's something we can take as a request, but it will need to come through. I think it's the Assets and Procurement Committee that's oversight of a corporate matter like that. But we can still nonetheless take it as a member question and get a response, just to give you the assurance around the point you've raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just come in. Going back to the previous item, the planning response, I mean, perhaps we can put a hook in there saying that we would have an expectation that the Modern Slavery Act is, that we are looking for, we expect the provenance of the materials used in the construction on these sites to be acceptable. Councillor Seif.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the access to gigabit capable broadband. I'm actually very surprised to see that we have as higher access as we do. Presumably, I'm sorry again because I am new to, I'm subbing on this committee. This is provided by the usual commercial providers of cabling and so forth. But however, presumably there is a limit, and it's not 100% because there are places that are not accessible or be extremely difficult to do so. So do we know whether this particular KPI will move very much further on? Do we expect it to?
So the issue that you raise around rural connectivity, as you outlined, for some parts of the county, it's not possible to rely on the traditional technologies. As I've outlined, this is clearly something that's been highlighted by the combined authorities, an area that we need to focus on for the next phase of the programme. And therefore we need to look at other technologies. Now, there are other technologies such as if you were able to provide 5G for some of these communities, that would actually enable equivalency in terms of connectivity. But again, that nonetheless requires probably intervention to deliver that because the market's not going to do it. So those are the types of things that are being discussed. And then once we have that programme agreed, then we can update the committee on that and provide appropriate indicators to provide assurance around delivery of that. So that's the type of thing that we're looking at now for the next phase. Does that answer the question, Councillor Seif? Yeah, thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up question on the same KPI? So looking at the urban gap, I'm aware that there's issues in my division with unadopted roads where different providers won't access them. Do we know what the kind of causes of the 4% that isn't available in the urban environments. And it would be really helpful as well to understand how often that relates to unadopted roads, because I think particularly in new builds, unadopted roads are a growing problem and a thing you don't expect to have in a brand new community. And it's a slightly separate issue, but it is a difficult issue because it sort of falls between the gaps and there's no way to actually force roads to become adopted, but it is an ongoing issue for communities who then feed back that they're not getting connection to broadband. So there was a question in there, sorry.
And that's a detailed question I aren't able to respond to today, but I can get some information both on what is accounting for the 4% and what else is still planned to try and close that gap. Yeah, so I would take that as a question to respond to, but in writing, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Manning?
Sorry, Frank, I'm about to add to your workload. Can we also break it down by symmetrical and asymmetrical connections? That would be obviously, that's an obvious big. So it's the same upload speed as the download speed. A lot of time you get download speed is fast. If your upload speed is slow, then it's basically a useless connection. And if this one is too much work, then please don't. But there's obviously a big difference between a 1 gigabit connection, a 10 gigabit connection, and 100 and up in terms of differences in what you can do with it. So if there's any way we can split it down, not necessarily those metrics, but some metrics along that would be useful.
Any other questions? Would anybody like to debate this item? In which case, the report recommendations are that the Environment and Green Investment Committee is asked to scrutinise and comment on performance information and act as necessary. I take it we are agreed that we have scrutinised and commented. Thank you. Excellent. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, Finance Monitoring Report. Can I ask Frank Jordan, Deputy Chief Executive and Executive Director for Place and Sustainability, to present this report, which is on page 589 of your agenda pack. Frank is supported by Becky Bartram, Strategic Finance Business Partner.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides the update on the budget position for the Directorate, but I'll just draw out for you in terms of the relevant parts of the Directorate budget that relate to this committee. This relates to the performance as of period 6. Before I get into the Directorate position, it's important to just outline the corporate context. So for the same period 6, as reported, Strategy, Resources and Performance, the forecast overspend at that point in time was £12.3 million across the council. And as such, all directorates, having obviously seen a forecast overspend at period 2 as well, which was reported to Strategy, Resources, Performance, all directorates have been asked and are taking forward mitigating action to be able to reduce that overspend position. And as a result of that, that is why the Directorate overall has an underspend forecast at this point in time of 2.6 million. So that's largely through direct action that's been taken by management to reduce particularly revenue costs to contribute to reducing to the overspending of the council overall. If I refer to the pack on page 594, what you'll see is the breakdown of the Directorate budget, and the two main lines of the divisions that would sit within the Place and Sustainability Directorate that relate to environment and green investment are the infrastructure and project delivery line, and that's because that's the division that manages and oversees the energy projects and has the accountability for the income associated with that, and I'll come back to that shortly. And then the other line is the environment planning economy line, and the most significant budget in that relates to waste. So that's the two elements of the Directorate budget that are most relevant to this committee. Now, in relation to some of the sort of key issues, which is summarised in the report as well, is that where we're looking at underspend, first of all, noting what I've said around requirement to mitigate the overspend across the council, we are seeing a forecast underspend against the waste disposal budget. Now, some of that's linked to what I've said in the performance report, because we have reduced tonnages going through the system because of, as I've said, because we've had drier periods of weather, so that's reduced the amount of waste. If we have less waste, we have less disposal cost. And through our subcontracting arrangements, we are maximising the use of energy from waste facilities. What that does is reduces landfill, and landfill being a very expensive form of waste disposal, primarily because of the landfill taxation that comes with it. So by reducing the amount that's going to landfill against what we assumed in the budget, and the total amount of tonnage is being lower than budgeted, we are seeing a forecast underspend of 1.2 million. And then on the other side, I mean, it's relevant to some of the questions that were raised by committee on previous items. The council itself in the past has commissioned and delivered energy projects, as we call them, which are effectively solar farms that have been built on council-owned land. They've been built and then worked on an assumption that the generation from those solar farms would then create income. The issue that we've seen with the most significant one of those, which is the North Angle Solar Farm, is that whilst that's now built and is energised and is exporting to the grid, that the issue is that with that particular solar farm, the grid has actually got an ability to effectively not take the power that potentially generates. So that's a technical term called curtailment. And that's just the way that the grid manages supply and demand across the whole of the grid. And with this being connected to the grid, we're subject to the same issue. So that has therefore reduced the amount of total income that we can secure as a council. We have nonetheless taken some further action with UKPN, so that's the UK Power Networks, to minimise the level of curtailment, so we can increase the level of income going forward. And I think for the 26-27 business plan, there will have a more realistic income target against that particular facility. So that's one particular issue, and I've referenced it a number of times. There have been a number of lessons that we've learnt in relation to these projects, and there was a formal lessons learnt report produced. So if members would like that information, I can circulate that again. And then the final thing I would say on revenue is that there's been some, as a reference, mitigating action. So that there is reserve funding from a reserve called the Just Transition Fund, which has been allocated to support the climate change and the environment strategy through a combination of reviewing the focus for that programme and actually commissioning works in a more efficient way or securing funding from other sources. We've identified that we don't need as much funding as initially allocated, so that's effectively been handed back to the corporate centre, as we call it, so that can then be effectively a reduction in revenue expenditure this year, and that's £485,000 of reduced expenditure against the budget, which is contributing to the underspend position of the Directorate. And then finally, there's an appendix that relates to capital. And on page 611, we particularly highlight that we have got risks that we're flagging at this stage in relation to household recycling centres. We are reviewing the best way to address the risks associated with the capital expenditure on those projects. And once we've done that, it may be that we need to come back to this committee specifically just to outline what we would do next. So just all I would say at this point in time is just highlighting it as a risk. Once we've worked through the best way management, then we'll report to committee on that. So that's the summary in terms of the revenue, the key issues, the mitigating action that we're taking, and then the capital risks that I've highlighted. That's covered at page 611 of your pack in terms of the capital performance. Okay, so again, happy to take any further questions, and Becky's here to assist as well. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any questions? Would anybody like to debate this item? In which case, are we happy to take this item as having been reviewed and commented on, or indeed not, but understood and accepted and listened to? I see no objections, in which case we'll take that as unanimous. Number 10, agenda training plan appointments. Will the Democratic Services Officer update us on any changes to the published report?
Chair, there's no changes. Just to remind members that invites have been sent out for the online workshop on the new climate change and environment strategy.
Thank you. Members, we are asked to note the agenda plan. That is the final item on today's agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for 21 January 2026 at 10 a.m. Thank you very much, and I declare this meeting closed.